The Business for Unicorns podcast is for fitness business owners who want actionable strategies to grow their business, take amazing care of their clients, and build a life and business they truly love. I'm your host, Michael Keeler, co-founder of Mark Fisher Fitness, and through Business for Unicorns, I'm a coach and consultant to industry-leading fitness studios around the world. Let's get started. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? It's time for a bonus episode with Mark Fisher. What's up, my friend?
Hello.
Quick housekeeping. You all might notice my audio might sound a little different today. We had some technical difficulties, so I'm using, ye old headphones today. But I'm still showing up with a great attitude, ready to have a great conversation.
Yeah, so tech on our way.
Yeah. So let's do this. I think the topic we landed on for today is one that's feeling really salient to us both personally at the moment and professionally, which is the topic of change. Managing change, navigating change, coping with change, designing change. We both feel like, this last year has been a lot of change for all of us on planet Earth. And in New York City, there's been a lot of change. Really, our MFF has really been pretty much shut down since March of last year. And we're going through this reopening process. And I think by the time you all will be listening to this, I think it'll be this week. So we're just, about 47 days away from reopening the MFF Clubhouse in-house kitchen. And we're feeling like all the change happening all at once. We thought we would just kind of talk about our feelings. Maybe this is a vent session. I'm not sure.
Therapy. Welcome to our therapy session.
This is a therapy session. And also maybe just, our thoughts broadly. So let's start here. Let's start without therapy. Let's start with, generally speaking, I'll ask you, Mr. Fisher, when you think about navigating change as a leader in your business or in general, what are the tools you turn to that help make that navigating that change more successful than not?
Yeah, gosh, I think depends on what level of change we're talking about, because I think different tools are useful depending on the scale of change. This feels to me definitely unprecedented history of my career, the number of things that are going to change in the next 2 months. So I can speak particularly to this. What did make me feel better this week, because this has definitely been a journey, I've definitely been fairly stressed at various moments, was actually just writing everything down. I know that for me, because I am so obsessed with making games you can win, the thing that makes me feel least or most beat up, I should say, and least successful is when I feel like I'm just overwhelmed by all of the things in the air and I don't even know what goes where or when things are going to get done. And that can lead to, I know for me, knowing myself well, I can actually go into like a very unhelpful spiral that's unhelpful for me and those around me. And while to some extent, I don't know if that can be 100% mitigated with this caliber of change, I know that for me, a crucial thing is just write down all of the things. So really, it's actually all the same stuff we always talk about, our time management stuff and Time Ninja, but it's on steroids. It's like a nuclear bomb version of it, because instead of writing down, like the 6 things need to get done this week, I created a week by week list of what needs to happen over the next 8 weeks, of which there were, anywhere from 5 to 12 major things need to happen each of those weeks. And for me, I have to say, after I got that all on paper, I actually felt better rather than feeling daunted. I probably should feel daunted. I should probably feel more daunted because we're looking all at once. It's like, that's a mountain we're climbing. But by making it bite-sized and breaking it down, for me personally, I feel a lot more control. I feel a lot more peace of mind. I'm still daunted by the amount of unknown because we're making very big changes to MFF. And of course, I am uncertain how everyone will respond to it. We know for sure some people not like some of the changes we're making, but I am heartened by knowing what the plan is and believing like we are definitely taking the opportunity to once again make very big changes with the business that we would have otherwise never had a chance to do and might never again, if we're lucky. Hopefully we'll never have a chance again to do something like this.
Yeah. Totally. And maybe we can dive into a few of those. While the things we're doing are maybe not exactly related to the topic of change, some listeners are probably going to be curious to know, like, what is all this change you're making? So maybe we can get there. We'll get there. We maybe can't spill all the beans because we haven't actually told our Ninja community all of it yet. But back to the topic at hand. I know one of the ways that I think about this is maybe too broad and maybe so broad not helpful, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is when I think about managing change, whether it's small or big things, I really think about it on 3 levels, right? It's like managing the process, managing the people and managing ourselves, right? And I feel like, even that framework, sometimes when I'm lost in a sea of change, helps recenter me and say, okay, well, what is the process? Have we designed what the process is for this change? Are we clear about why we're doing it and what we're doing, what the roadmap or path looks like to get to the other side of this change? And that one is usually pretty straightforward, at least in our work together. We like that work a lot.
Totally.
That's really fun. That's where you write
Totally.
down what the goals are and the deadlines, and very much like what you said. The second part is probably the trickiest of the three for me, which is managing the people, right? This is where you have to communicate, foster those relationships, make sure everyone's cool, constantly check in with feelings, constantly gather feedback as you're making the plans and adjusting the plans, making sure people aren't burnt out. Like, that's the people stuff. And then the personal stuff, I'll speak for myself, and that one, it's not always the easiest, but I feel like I have a pretty good handle on this. And this goes to what you were saying, is that I think as good as my processes are on a regular basis for managing myself and my time and my tasks, that if I feel like they're good most of the time, they'll get tested more during times of change, for sure, right? And I might second guess them. But if they're pretty locked in during times of non-change, I'll default to those habits I've created during normal times, during times of change. But I think the lesson for many people, as we know, having taught Time Ninja to so many people, is that most people during regular times, their habits are shit. Right? They don't. So in times of real struggle and change, they default to what are not so great habits, and that makes it even harder. Yeah, but let's just talk for a second about the middle messy part where it's about managing people. What's some of your experience there about what works?
I mean, certainly I am a believer, as you all know, and maybe podcast listeners know, that you can't communicate enough. In my experience working with our team for the past 10 years in all sorts of iterations and all sorts of configurations of humans, I don't think there's ever been a situation where I felt like we really were communicating too much. I think it's possible potentially to give too much information in a messaging, so what's important starts to get lost. I think you need to be thoughtful about that. But one particular pro tip that I adopted earlier this year, which I think is going to be relevant to our size of organization, I assume a typical training gym owner won't need this system, is it's so simple, but I write an email to the team once a week. On Wednesday, I write an email and I do some public shout outs of anywhere from 2 to 5 people. They're doing cool things. And I give them an update of one to ideally no more than 3 things. Here's 3 things you need to know about what's changing. My hope is that helps people feel like they're a little bit plugged in for me. And I also purposely in those communications always invite people to connect with me if they want to chat more, because I'm always very transparent. I don't want to bog them down with lots of details, but I want them to feel like they know what's happening. Because the thing I think to appreciate as a leader is, even though you might have your own set of challenges with the change, because I imagine some of you don't like change, and I feel lucky I want the next thing, right? So even though this is actually testing me, maybe for the first time in my career, the reality is I still like change and my hand is on the till, so to speak. So I think, creating some regular practices to potentially hit the limits of over communication with people, because the other challenge you run into is part of, I think, managing the people is understanding that different people are different. So you'll have some people that are a bottomless hole of desire for information. And if they don't know everything that's going on, they feel affronted. They feel like they're floating in space. They feel like you're not looping me in on these things. Like, you're driving all over the road. What's going on up there? And then you have other people that just don't care and they trust you and they assume it's going to work out okay. And their eyes are glazing over and they're maybe good humored, or maybe they're even annoyed because they don't want to hear about this anymore. So I think that art of, as best you can, and for training gym owners, this is easier than a larger organization, of modulating the type of communication to individuals, I think is important. Because one thing that's interesting about this particular moment is, I wouldn't say I feel detached from the trainers, but in a really wonderful way, we've got an incredibly strong fitness director in Wheels. I know we talk about it all the time in this podcast, and she is so plugged in with them that it has allowed me in ways that are positive and slightly scary for me to be, I think, plugged out from the trainers in a way that historically hasn't been my experience of MFF. So I think that also has been challenging for me. but also very positive to learn to trust, particularly with like Wheels, because I'm not going to ever have anybody be better at this anyway. I trust that, like, Wheels is the voice of MFF, and she's, my consigliere and my proxy, and she's keeping tabs on all the people, and she's so good at her job. But yeah, that is an interesting and different thing, because really my day-to-day communications consist of like 5 people. Right. There's 5 people I speak to on a very regular basis. And a lot of the trainers, and I'll give them like random check-ins as humans from here and there. But I know it's technically not actually my responsibility looped in on all the things. And that has been difficult for me.
Yeah. Well,
Daddy wants to make it better. Daddy wants to make it better.
Totally. Yeah. Well, we'll save that for the therapy portion of our call. But I think there's a few things you said that I really just want to highlight for listeners and viewers. One is there's something that's really important about the frequency of communication and consistency of the communication. And then also your ability to kind of modulate how much detail you give in that communication. Like, I think both things are so important. So the fact that it's every Wednesday, people can expect it, and they know they're going to get some praise. There's some praise in there, which is useful, especially during times of change.
Which I do, if I can just quickly jump in, I'm doing that not only because you can't ever give your team enough positive feedback, and I don't know, maybe this is true or not. You can let me know if this is like maybe a dumb idea or not. But in my head, I'm honestly thinking, and this isn't meant to be manipulative, but I want them to open up because they know they might see their name highlighted with a positive thing. So I'm almost baiting them with the potential for dopamine, and then tricking them by giving them the knowledge that, again, some of them are going to diligently read every single word, and some of them are, they're not as interested in reading their emails sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the point of praise, right? Is that like people will seek it out and want to do more of the thing that gets them the reward of being recognized. So like, it's actually the whole reason we say nice things to people, right? It's like,
well, it's part of it. That I don't think that.
But I mean, the reason
things, then they'll do what you want.
No, I didn't mean like.
I know you mean like that.
But is that it feels good, right? Like that people will want more of it, and they'll do more of that thing that'll feel good and makes the world better, and makes a business better, And so I think that makes sense.
One other pro tip too, I think for people here to consider that I think is important. If you find yourself frustrated by something that your team is not consistently doing, instead of chastising people for not doing it, find the person that's doing the thing and publicly celebrate them and keep doing it over and over. And to Keir's point, you will eventually, I believe, see what is getting praised gets repeated generally.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I also think that I was going to say one more thing, like just lost my train of thought, but the other thing that I think you mentioned, which is important, is that if the emails are full of crazy amounts of detail, that they just get into crazy amounts of granularity, and then they're super long, and there's paragraph after paragraph, I think that's also a real deterrent to communication during times of change.
Sure. That,
even if it's useful for people to get a lot of details, sending that in the email is not the place to do it, number one. And number two, it's certainly not going to be memorable that way. So I think, making sure that in your communications, like an email, there's a high level overview of what the most key information is, but then ability to access more detail, either in a conversation or by calling you or in a separate meeting. But I think that's important, because if we throw everything we got at people all the time, that's not going to work for most of the people most of the time. Like you said, there's a rare person who's like, give me all the detail, I'll read all the paragraphs. But in my experience, that's pretty few people in all the teams I've ever worked on.
Yeah, they don't care that much. It's not, they don't like you. They got their stuff going on. They like their job, but they got stuff going on.
Yeah, 100%. So I think that's important to make sure you have other things, like kind of a kind of quote open door policy, where it's like the end of that email is like, if you want to talk more about this, I'd be happy to. Here's how. I think that's a great way to go. Yeah. Well, let's just talk a little bit more about the personal side of it, just because I know we've both expressed in the last week or so that we both like change. We're looking forward to what's coming next, but it also can be daunting. So how do you personally manage the feeling of overwhelm that comes with this amount of change?
Yeah, I think it's back to just being easy and being gentle and not being too hard on myself. Because this really has, the past couple weeks have been challenging in a way, really not since when the world was ending. I felt like stressed in some moments, even though I know we're going in a positive place. So, I mean, certainly all the self-care stuff matters. I think part of it is this is very granular and a sort of guide to Mark. I'm not sure I'm suggesting like, you should do this too. is realizing I'm going to be doing my best work the first couple hours I'm awake because there's so many thoughts through my head. I'm finding I'm getting depleted a little bit earlier, and I'm losing my irascible, relentless optimism before the day is over, and sometimes like a couple hours into the day. But I'll tell you what, those first couple hours, that first cup of coffee, I can do anything. So I think being very methodical, and again, we're going back to time ninja stuff, but focusing on the big rocks, working on the knottiest, thorniest, most difficult problem first thing in the morning while I'm mentally freshest, while I'm peak caffeinated, or before any of the invariable challenges of a time like this have maybe taken some of the sheen off my glimmer for the day. I think that has been a very important piece of it. I also think for me, another thing that has been helpful is just constantly reminding myself that as challenging as this feels in some moments, it's not going to be forever. This is a very specific thing, for better, for worse, in 2 months. And that I will say actually is in many ways part of why this frankly isn't as difficult as the challenge that virtually everybody listening went through. Is those timelines were so indeterminate. So even though I'm daunted by climbing this mountain now, at least with reasonable certainty, we can say MFF is opening up in June 28th, and that has allowed us to plan a little bit better. So I think there's something to be said for allowing yourself to feel your feelings, to be present, to feel what's going on in your body, to be able to talk about it, and also remember like this too shall pass, even in the most stressful moments. Like things are, even in a challenging moment, the changes will end at some point. They will end.
Yeah. Well, I think that you're right that it's such a big difference between the last year that many of us experienced, especially in New York, of like just not knowing. That unknown was an extra layer of stress that we couldn't even engage in a meaningful change process because we just didn't have anything to process. It was just like, well, I don't know, the business is just closed. And so I think the fact that now there is a timeline, there's some knowledge to work with, I think is a game changer. I think the one thing I would highlight is something I think you just said in your last sentence there, which is one of the things I think is most useful to me, and this might seem overly obvious, but during times of change, when I'm stressed out and overwhelmed, is to talk about it. Right. I mean, I talk to people all the time, as you know, in coaching calls, that they're all bottled up about it. They stay in their head about it.
Yeah.
And I know that would drive me nuts. And I'm fortunate that I've had a business partner and I have, a husband and both of whom I like talking about these things with, and I'm comfortable being vulnerable and being candid about most of these things. And I know not everyone has that kind of support, but I think if you're someone who struggles in change and doesn't have a support system like that, where you can be vulnerable and candid and talk about the messy thoughts you're having and put out shitty first drafts without the fear of judgment or failure, then go find some of that. Go find some of those people to surround yourself with, either on your team or in your life, or, but I think it's huge for me, because I know the moments where I do get stuck in my head and bottle it all in, it only gets worse. I can just catastrophize for days in my head, as opposed to getting in conversation about it, where it kind of tones down some of those demons that are so easy to find in my own head.
Pain shared is pain divided, as they say.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I think there is another dichotomy too, because on the one hand, there's something to be said for putting on a brave face and instilling confidence with your team, but also not being fakey and being inaccessible. Because the reality is, for better or for worse, if you're not in a great place, everybody knows it. So it's like, admit it, it's okay. And admittedly, like again, there's maybe a little bit of an art there. I think, to your point, I think for listeners, it's part of why I do think it's helpful to have, if not like a therapist or like a helpful spouse, like a coach of some kind. I know not everybody can have a business partner, but the reality is, admittedly, sometimes there are things that you need to talk through that may or may not be appropriate to share with people on your team. Even though I am a fan generally of pushing like the candor and the transparency and the vulnerability kind of as far as it can go. But certainly I can understand, I assume that is tension for a lot of people in the world. For whatever reason, I've never really identified with like, I'm a man, I can't show my feelings. I'm a man, I can't cry. I'm like, no, I just cry. If I'm sad, I'll just have a little cry. I'll just let those tears come out. And then I always feel better afterwards. So I totally miss that messaging. I hear people talk about it all the time. They're like, men are allowed to have feelings. Men were raised. And I'm like, I never got that message at all.
Yeah.
But if you're listening, and I know certainly we have listeners of different genders, but if that is a bugaboo for you, and bugbear rather, and you feel like, oh, but like I feel like as a man, I feel like I can't let my team in on it. I would say number one, they probably know. And number two, even if there are some things you don't feel are appropriate to disclose, I think having some sort of resource and some place to talk it out is going to be key. It's going to be really important.
Yeah.
You can't keep that inside.
Yeah, I want to plus one that in that, like, your emotions are contagious and more transparent than you.
Knows.
Everyone knows. You're not hiding anything, so you might as well talk about it because it's written all over your face. And I think the second thing is actually a really good question we can maybe pick apart a little bit more is just when a lot of people are going through change, especially the negative kind of change where there's like some shame attached, like our business is tanking and I'm afraid to tell that my team that we only have 3 months of cash left, or that then there's this dance that people do about
only 3 months of cash for a training gym owner. That's like
I know, that'd be huge. That'd be amazing. Yeah, that'd be amazing. We only have one more payroll. How about that? One more payroll, and then we're probably gonna have to shut down or whatever the catastrophe is. They're struggling with how transparent do I be? Where is the line between what I tell my whole team or my clients and not? And while we've always tried to err on the side of transparency, we often will massage the messages. We'll be transparent, but we won't maybe say it as plainly as we want to. We'll say it in a way that we think is useful or productive, or we'll add as much optimism as we can muster to make sure that we're not only portraying fear or shame, but portraying like, we're not stoked about this, and we also are pretty confident we'll solve it. So you just want to talk a little bit about how do you think about massaging those messages and deciding what to share and what not to share?
Gosh, that's a great question. I don't know that I have really. I probably should think through and create a more thorough paradigm rather than what I do for the most part, which is operate on instinct. I also think there's something to be said for understanding, what moment is your role to provide real leadership, and what moment is your role to model being a real human in a way that makes you accessible and lets people in. Sort of thinking through this out loud, and I'm thinking out loud, so I don't even know if I like this. I wonder if there's something to be said for considering starting with your intention and the impact you want to have on the people around you and letting that guide the conversation. Because sometimes I imagine the impact is to grow closer, right? By disclosing, right? As they teach us in acting school, disclosure is always a bid for intimacy. And I think there can be something that can be aligning and can be a resonance to have your leader say the thing that you kind of know is going on anyway. And that doesn't necessarily need to be like freaking out and having a meltdown in front of your team, which I probably would one, discourage you from doing, and two, it's probably what most of us are doing is not ever actually, if you're thinking logically, probably not worth having a meltdown about. And then at what moment, are you stepping into that kind of leadership role where your job is to be the visionary and really cast forth future pace? Here's where we're going. Because it reminds me a lot of the Stockdale Paradox, which is, there's a famous book called Good to Great, cliche. It's a good business book. It is good. You should read it. And one of the, I'm not sure what you call it, one of the tenets, I guess, of these good to great companies, this study of these companies that beat the stock market over a certain period of time, was embracing something called the Stockdale Paradox. And Stockdale was, if I'm remembering correctly, I think was a Vietnam prisoner of war who made it through years of being a hostage. And the reason that he says he was able to make it through is because he never lost hope. And he was brutally realistic about the ugly, horrible facts. And the point he made was, and this is interesting, is that it was the people that kept thinking oh, we're going to be home by this time next year, Christmas. This is it. This is the last year. Those were actually the people that didn't make it. Where Stockdale, and again, they make this guy look like he's a cold mother. This guy, he is down. He is I am going to get through this, and this is going to be horrible. So decide how to use that. Maybe wouldn't frame it exactly like that with your team, but I think that's perhaps the nuance is the vision. Here's where we're going. It's going to get better. But also, I'm not going to piss in your face and tell you it's raining. I'm going to be really love with you about here's the facts on the ground. Here's the challenges. Here's the plan. Let's go. We got this.
Yeah. 100%. I think I vibe with all of that. I think that's often been our approach. I think if I maybe just add maybe some another layer to it, or maybe give it a formula. I think often the way we've tended to say things is starting with the vision. Here's where we're going. Here's why we're going through this change. Here's where we hope to get to on the other side. Here's what we hope it looks like. Mostly here's the why, here's the why, here's the why, and a little bit of the what. And then I think often what we do to give that context next in the formula is like, here's how we feel about that.
Yeah.
You know, here's a little bit of like what our experience has been. Maybe we can talk about it. How do you feel about that? What is that vision? How's that vision sit with you? You know, I think is often the next piece. And then we finish with some sort of call to action. Like, here's what we're going to do. Here's your role. Here's my role. Here's what happens next. And I think that like that 1, 2, 3 thing, like here's where we're going. Here's how we feel about that. And here's what we do next. I feel like if I had to look back at all the times we've done these kind of communications, it often looks something like that. So maybe not exactly, but it's pretty close.
I mean, it's interesting. That format feels very similar to what has now become this quarterly State of the Union thing that we do, which is another thing I think worth recommending is like maybe once a quarter, take a moment with your team and give them at least a high level overview of what's happening. Again, depending on the size of your training gym, this may be more or less relevant. But one other piece of this that's interesting that I think is a valuable skill to have, and again, I don't know that this can be taught, but I suspect if you've opened up a business, this is maybe possible. And again, I'm not sure I'm actually recommending this as a useful thing, and maybe you'll all be like, this guy's got problems. But if you open up a business, there's a certain level of self-confidence that's there. You might not feel it all the time, but I also know that there is a, this is a really problematic term, a usefully sociopathic drive that you can go into that I think, can be a useful contribution of energy to the team to say that there's nothing that we're not going to do we're going to get through this. And admittedly, I have to imagine that's difficult to do in the moments where maybe you don't feel that. And I'm not saying I feel that every day, all day long, or that I never doubt myself, but I do know that that is a useful thing that for better or for probably worse, at times I can lean on if I need to. It's just this unrelenting will to succeed and knowing at the very least that failure just doesn't feel like an option, right? And it's just, again, I want to acknowledge I'm saying out loud, it sounds semi like troublesome, but it can be useful because it can, give me that burst of energy of like, die on the treadmill, as we say at MFF. I'm gonna die on the treadmill.
Yeah, totally. I think I totally get it. I mean, I think you're right that if you're going to have the self-confidence to start a business and say, I have something you need to offer the world and I want to build something that doesn't exist, I think some of that is useful in times of change to say, like, we can do this. I think I might offer maybe a different shade of it that maybe something different than what you're talking about. But what it brought to mind was I often feel like part of my job as a leader is to be a cheerleader, even when I think the team's going to lose. Right? And so, I don't know if that's about my own personal drive, but more about like, that's part of why I just see my role is even when I feel beaten down or unsure or not as confident, I know part of my job is to make sure other people believe that we can do it, to believe that we're going to get through it. And maybe cheerleaders, like maybe not the best analogy, but that's kind of what I feel like. And I think about cheerleading a lot just as a coach, is that part of my job is to give them a lens on the situation that is optimistic, that is positive, that is like, this is going to be tough, but we have the skills it takes. We have all the possibilities within us that we can make this happen if we really work. And I think that, I think that's useful because I can put that on even when I doubt parts of it, right? I can put that on sincerely and say, this is something I believe. And at the same time, believe that like, oh, I know, but we could also really fuck up here. I think I can do both.
And it's so interesting too, because as we unpack this in real time, it occurs to me that there is a paradox, I could say, of my own experience, even the past weeks of having like some moments where I don't like, there's a part of me that I know is not 100% rational, just feeling like daunted, like, how are we going to do this? What if we don't like it? What's going to get all messed up? But on some level, I actually don't ever really actually feel any sort of concern for the business. And I would acknowledge that I want to offer you is probably a real limitation. I would encourage you to consider it my advice, because I want to be sensitive to the fact there might be an individual listening to this that really your home is on the line, that you're really in kind of dire straits and your business is on the line. Whereas frankly, for MFF, it's really a matter generally of like, are we not going to win as hard as we want to win, which feels like a loss because we so bad want to, hit that next level and really perform at a high level. But I concede that that probably is an underlying level of comfort that I have that I can also allows me to go into that drive, because I do believe fundamentally, because also we've made choices. We've set up the business in such a way that we've protected the downside. That's not really something really drastic and catastrophic happening isn't actually the worst case scenario is we don't win as hard as we wanted.
Yeah.
which I still won't allow.
And if anything, frankly, this last year has just been more evidence to fuel that part of you. It's like there was a pandemic and we still won pretty hard.
Yes. And here's one other thing I'll offer to people that is interesting, because this go around, which I mentioned, I haven't been, again, I can't equate how stressed I've been recently to the pandemic time. But the thing that I learned from bouncing out of the pandemic and then figuring this out again is, admittedly, I was like, well, we can do anything. Like, are you kidding? We pulled this off. And even now, in the moments where I have felt more, again, not the most stressed I've ever been in my career by any means, but more stressed than I've been in a little while, as we considered just the daunting logistics of opening back up. I have, even in those moments, been able to step outside and remind myself that this adversity is, I'm literally becoming stronger. Like, literally right this moment, by becoming resilient and rising to this challenge, this is what's going to make the book worthwhile, right? Like, ships were not made for the harbor, ships were made for the sea. And I think that even in the moments where I felt a little stressed and overwhelmed by things, because of having gone through the pandemic, which was so much worse, and seeing how we came out of that, there is now, I'm even now able to step out for a moment and I think really acknowledge, at least intellectually, that this is actually also about to make me stronger because of this thing we're going through. We've got 47 days and a list of all these things I don't know how to do. And every day we just get up and we're just going to make it up. We're going to figure it out one by one.
Yeah. Well, let's leave it there. Let's leave a little cliffhanger that if all of you want to hear more about all these changes that have been stressing us out, all these things we're planning to do over the next 47 days, you got to stay tuned for the next bonus episode, which will be 2 weeks from this one. Because by then we also will have probably announced most of it to our team and to the Ninja Army. And so we'll be able to talk about it more publicly.
Yes.
So
hopefully we'll even have decided exactly what we're doing.
Hopefully we'll have finished the plans, not just have written them in crayon.
Yeah, it's a very wild thing, because the last thought I'll give to this, again, which I think whether you're starting a business for the first time or making massive changes, is, I just want to say that I see, if you've ever felt that moment, where I have, where, I'm going to write all these communications about what the new models are. And I'm just thinking about, I'm going to do this on Friday. I'm going to look at this blank page of paper and I'm just going to start writing. And I don't even really know what I'm going to say or even what we're going to be offering. And I'll write it and I'll write it and I'll do a shitty first draft and then we'll make it better. And it's like when we started MFF and we sold memberships and we sold classes called Kick-Ass Conditioning, Superhero Strength. I remember the distinct moment back on my mom and dad's car driving for Christmas, like 2 weeks before we opened, being like, going to design them. I was like, shit, I don't know what these things are. I have no idea what I just named these things. I don't even know what they are. And I think, that's when it's great. As Goethe says, there's magic in the beginning. Just start. Just do it. I think
it's a great thing to leave everyone with is that, just the power of just like the ready, fire, aim approach once in a while. The power of just shitty first drafts. In these times of change, like you have to learn by doing. You just got to get your hands dirty first, and then worry about what you're building later, and we wouldn't, we're not terribly, we're not big risk takers.
No, in the grand scheme, no.
And we're really not. But in these moments when you got to build the plane fast, you don't have time to go phase by phase, step by step. You kind of dive in and just start swinging. And I'm excited to tell people more about all the swings we're taking on the next episode.
And we'll be sure to be candid the entire time about what we're learning in real time. But as a brief tease, I think we are making some big changes to MFF, and I think it's going to make for a better MFF with a better service. I think we're helping more people. And I think we're really positioning ourselves probably for the first time ever to scale in a much more meaningful way. Whether or not we choose to do that, I think will depend on a number of things. But I do see we're making changes now that are setting up the business to grow in a way that the old model, as much as we loved it, I don't think had that potential. I think there were just some constraints built into the way we built it because we know what we're doing. And I think we're getting to fix them. And as on the one hand, horrifying it is to make all these changes. On the other hand, it's very, very exciting. And you'll be finding out in real time how we're doing. We'll be letting you know in our candid, transparent way.
Yeah, totally.
We feel good about it.
Yeah, well, thanks, Fisher. It was a fun conversation about change that was totally unplanned. And I feel like there was a lot of great ground covered. So thanks for listening, friends. As always, if you want to hear us talk about any specific topics, email us, mark@businessfunicorns.com, michael@businessfunicorns.com. Follow us on the social medias. Comment down below wherever you're watching this video or listening to the podcast.
Yes.
Leave us reviews, all the things. And we'll see you again in this bonus episode in 2 weeks.
Oh yeah, and one thing before you go,
Yeah.
if you do find you need help talking to somebody, I think you might be saying this, and I don't know if we've announced this yet officially, but we are but a stone's throw from opening up enrollment for the Unicorn Society. So if you believe that pain shares, pain divided, and you want somebody to talk to that's maybe not your spouse or your team member or your employees, well, we'd be happy to talk to you. So we're really excited that enrollment's going to be coming up just in a few weeks. We don't have unlimited availability because we like to keep that intimate, because we like to have deep personal relationships with all of you. But yeah, if any of this resonates and you want to spend some more quality time with us, well, we'd like to spend quality time.
In fact, you can go right now, if you go to businessunicorns.com, click work with us and Unicorn Society. You can sign up for the wait list for Unicorn Society. So you'll be the first to know when enrollment opens.
Yes.
And as Mark said, we don't have that many spots. We open up twice a year. And so you want to be first to know, because I think we're actually coming out of this pandemic. A lot of gym owners switching gears, needing some extra support. Yes. I think we'll have a lot of applicants this round. So by all means, friends, go to the website, get on that wait list, and you'll be hearing more about enrollment soon.
Hurrah.
Anything else, Fisher?
No, we like you. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye, y'all. Hey, friends, before you go, just one more thing. If you enjoy this podcast, you get value out of it, you enjoy listening, please share this podcast, comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Please share it with friends and family. We don't spend any money on marketing or advertising. And so the only way people find out about this podcast is from you. So please do everything you can to share it with friends and fellow colleagues in the fitness industry. We love making it, and we want to keep doing it for a long, long time. So I appreciate your support. Go have a kick-ass day. Bye.